Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in.
Hey, Zena.
Hey, Mark.
How's it going?
Good, good. We're both on the road this week,
Yeah,
so
hence our fancy microphones.
I
So,
know. Hope it all sounds good. Super excited because we're talking with Joe Fenn, who is the global director for AdGreen. And for me, like it's a bit
Mhm,
ironic because I am at the Sustainable Brands Conference this week. So I am hearing all about how brands are thinking about sustainability,
mhm.
talking about sustainability, how they want to make it irresistible, all of this stuff. Um, the regulatory side, like soaking up a lot, but hearing her perspective on like rubber hits the road, this is what
Yeah.
happens,
And she's
really
been at it a long time. I remember when I started Portable Electric, she was one of the first people to reach out. And so yeah, so I ended up speaking to her quite a bit. And yeah, it's been nice to see her journey and for her to intertwine with the work that we're doing here in North America.
totally. She has been at this, she's built it up. She is a force, really. So looking forward to hearing kind of her view of it all because she's got the inside track and definitely on the data side, which is
Mhm.
super interesting.
So what are you seeing and hearing at the Sustainable Brands Conference?
Um, a lot about the compliance session was completely full. We're talking about other things like leadership, complexity theory, super interesting.
Hmm.
How to talk about sustainability from your brand's perspective, how to make it easy and irresistible for the consumer. So a bit about the consumer side. Um, and there's been some talk about advertising and the carbon footprint of that, but not as much as I would have liked to hear. So definitely
Hmm.
more there uh, to explore and dive into. Creative agencies are here, brands are here, and any and all folks, lawyers, like it spans
Yeah,
the gamut. People I've been meeting, so quite interesting. People, professors, I've met a couple of professors who teach this stuff. So a
it's
lot
big
of
business. It's already big business. I hope our hope is that this becomes standard business,
yeah,
right, over time. This should just be fully integrated into all aspects of branding and advertising.
yeah. But interestingly, like I'm always interested in behind the scenes, the production aspect
Hmm.
of it all. So I went to a mixer out on the lawn at the hotel last night, and I'm walking up and I'm listening. I'm like, wait a second, what is that noise? And I walk up, and there is a diesel generator right there, kind of across the wall from the mixer. And I'm like, why is this here? So I follow the cable
Yeah.
into the mixer and go right up to the piece of equipment that this thing is powering. One little piece of equipment. And I asked the guy who's doing his demonstration,
Hmm.
I'm like, so you're using this generator for this thing? And sure enough, like that was the only thing. And it was a glass crusher, and they were making sand. And he's
Yeah.
like, and I told him all about battery power stations, and and you can set it right next to the thing and all. And he had no idea, does these
It's
things all the time, right? So
especially
just
the event equipment rental industry is still quite behind. They're not referencing each other, right? Like the film equipment folks, they're very referential. There are also a handful of large organizations that own a lot of these groups, so they're already in it. But the small mom and pop equipment rental for events, it is still a long road to get into their rental equipment, and to displace they're already proven. We heard Joe talk about it, right? It's like, well, this is just I own the equipment and this is what we do.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
that's the challenge.
100%. Well, I got his card. I told him I'd send him some options. He's based in LA. Like they do these kinds of
Hmm.
activations all the time. Like this is a
Yeah.
great learning opportunity. So,
To offer
we'll see.
another solution, right? And also, I
Yeah.
think it's also, but it's the event producers who need to also be aware. If you're producing a sustainable brands conference, I mean, you really have to go a little bit extra and make sure that you've got all of your bases covered.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a couple things that I think will just add to the richness of the
Hmm.
sustainability for this event. So I mean, it's been the content side has been really great. So
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here and be learning and absorbing and meeting interesting people. So do like that.
that's great.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're gonna speak with Joe.
Yeah, here we go. We're here with Joe Fenn from Ad Green. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank
Hi,
you, guys.
Joe.
See you.
You too.
Yeah,
It's been a while.
it's been a
Yeah.
while. It's been a long
Yeah.
while. We're happy to have you. We're happy to have your perspective on the advertising side of things. The purpose of this podcast is to elevate the voices of people behind the scenes doing amazing work. And you've been on our radar for a long time. We've been watching what you're doing in advertising. So would love to hear more about that and how you got into sustainability in the first place. Can you take us back to the beginning? Like, how did you start thinking about sustainability? What were you doing at the time? Um, how did you come to this?
Cool. Yeah. So I guess it was always kind of one of those things I was interested in. I don't know if you know anything about this show, but there's a show in the UK called Blue Peter, and it's kind of a magazine show for kids. And there was always competitions and things, and I used to enter them, and I do a bit of drawing, and I used to enter them, and I think I wrote them a long letter about how much packaging was involved in like Christmas confectionery. And I'd somehow managed to work out how much plastic was involved. I don't know how, when I was probably about 8. And another one about, I think, a hedgehog that I'd saved. I was one of those really nerdy kids, and I came out with like a green Blue Peter badge that I used to wear with pride. So this was a long time coming. But I guess it really kicked in, and kind of Ad Green was born in effect when I was a production manager. So this is going back about 10 years. And I was working on, relatively sort of large advertising projects in the UK, occasionally abroad, but mainly sort of close to London. And just seeing the amount of waste, that was really my kind of gateway drug, if you like, into kind of what was going on and maybe what could be done about it. So that was kind of how I got into it. At the time, there still is, an organization called Albert, which I was aware of and started chatting to them and just got a sense of what they were able to do in their industry. So they're in the sort of film and TV side, as you probably know. And just sort of understanding what they had done gave me the inspiration to kind of attempt something similar in advertising. So that's kind of how it got started and where it came from, really.
And Joe, tell us a little bit about like how different is advertising to the sort of more standard film and TV production?
So I've never worked in film and TV. I'm saying that now, have I? No, I don't think I've ever done a film or TV project. But the turnaround is so much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of similarities. We use a lot of the same suppliers. Some of the crew kind of work in both areas. But we're answering to different people. We're answering to brands, and if you're a sort of production company side or a freelance crew member, you're answering to, either the production company if you're crew, or the agency if you're the production company. So it's a sort of a different chain of command and a different sort of set of stakeholders. But I'd say the key difference is the turnaround time. There were projects that I was brought in on, maybe I'd have 2 weeks prep and then we'd shoot, and the production teams are very small. So when I was a production manager, I would sometimes have a production assistant, but quite often it was just me and the producer. So really putting together the shoot was pretty much my sort of day-to-day role, was putting together the whole shoot, managing the budget, and the producers looking after the ad agency, the director, making sure everyone's happy with what we're putting together, and, getting everything signed off from the last outfit, the last prop. It all gets signed off beforehand. So on the day, you're literally just running the storyboard and you're in and out. and you're
So,
done.
so you're talking about like 1 day productions, 3 day, 7 day,
Yeah,
multiple
probably.
locations.
Exactly. I think the longest project I ever worked on was a 7-day shoot, and probably had sort of 10 locations, maybe, 2 locations a day, 3 locations a day, that sort of thing. So it's very speedy. You're really trying not to shoot anything that's not boarded. You just get a few takes of each. You're making sort of 30 seconds worth in a day, or 60 over a couple of days, that sort of thing. Nowadays, there's a lot more content being made as a result of any shoot, really to sort of maximize on the budget being spent. So quite often it'll be, maybe the TV ad, but also some influencer content and some content for socials and online. And so there's lots of kind of, lots of different framing up that we're doing to get sort of, lots of things at the same time. So it's sort of efficient in that sense, but that's really because there's just more channels for things to go on nowadays, where there sort of wasn't so much emphasis, 10 years ago or so. So lots of similarities, but yeah, I think time and the sort of chain of command are probably the two biggest differences.
And so this sort of chain of command, you've talked, you walked us through a bit of it. Where do you see either where sustainability is coming in, or where the opportunity for sustainability to come in, given the sort of more unique chain of command that we have in advertising?
I think what we've seen is it tends to come from both sides, depending on the engagement level of the company, whichever one it is. So sometimes we see, in terms of sort of engagement with Ad Green, what we're doing, if I can kind of speak from that angle, which is where I sort of know best, but either we'll kind of have a company come to us and they're like, we really want to start doing this, we want to start measuring everything, we want to take the training, and there's kind of almost like a company pride sort of emphasis, like, we want to make this change, we want to be the leaders, we want to kind of show we're doing the right thing. And make those reductions as well, and pick the right suppliers and all of that. Or we find brands that are really engaged with their sustainability plans are leading the charge and sort of getting everyone else on board. So their agencies, oftentimes they'll have more than one. So one might handle what we call above the line, or used to, so sort of the TV stuff, and one might handle PR or something underneath, below the line. So there's kind of different, there's quite often multiple agencies involved, even if there's only one brand. So it sort of depends which way around that is. Sometimes you get the perfect marrying of both, where there's sort of an engaged brand and they're working with a production company that's already really on it, or an agency that's really committed already. But it can be sort of one or both or all of those things. It just sort of depends on the company, really, I find.
And do you find that that in that are there more production companies that are is it an even distribution, or are there more production companies wanting this and saying to the agency, is it kind of in film and TV, we like to point fingers, oh, the employers should do this, oh, the labor should do this, or whatever. Is it like that? Are productions companies waiting for like the agency to say something, or are they taking initiative and asking for it? Like, what's that look like?
I think so. In advertising, really broadly speaking, I'm making a massive generalization. Sure. There are sort of roughly 6 to 7 big holding companies, and they own the majority of agencies around the world. I think I'm speaking correctly here. And with the sort of engagement of those holding companies, that can really accelerate sort of engagement. And we found that quite a lot of them, or almost all of them, I'd say perhaps even all of them, are really committed at this point, which is an amazing place to be. And there are many reasons, sort of different, reporting requirements that are coming up, sort of, procurement regulations from brands when they're procuring their services, having those strong, sort of, maybe they're B Corps, for example. So we find the agencies are sort of the linchpin in the middle, who are sort of like not only engaging the production companies because they want things done the quote unquote right way, but also sort of showing their brands what they can do on a reduced carbon budget. So they're sort of the amazing place in the middle. So we find if the holding company is on board, it sort of filters down to all of their agencies, or lots of them. Maybe certain markets are slightly ahead of others, for example, but we find if they can sort of really be that force, then it kind of just filters out to everyone else. Now, I would say that for some of the brands, obviously some of them, their marketing services is a very small portion of their spend, and their focus is really on tackling the biggest issues, as it always should be. You focus on the big ones first. So for some brands, although they're sort of interested and engaged, they're sort of having to look in other places where they're maybe their logistics or their manufacturing is a much bigger piece of their pie. So whilst it's great their agencies are involved, they might not be that engaged, and it becomes more of a sort of almost like kind of like a sales piece for the agency. We can do this for you, and they're like, great, that's an added bonus, brilliant, because we're kind of looking over here with all this stuff, but that's great, you can do it too. So just depends, I think, on a few different factors, but I'd say, yeah, the agencies are really sort of leading.
So you've been at this for almost 10 years. I mean, we met 2016, very, very early on. Looking back, how good is the advertising industry doing? Like doing a check-in here. And then also you're in the UK. Have you any comparables to the US and North American advertising industry?
So I'd say, look, it's a massive challenge, especially with the amount of content that gets made nowadays. It's never just one 30-second TV ad anymore. It's multiple pieces. It's let's make 10 versions and we'll keep them just in case, because it's I wouldn't say it's easy to do that, but it's everyone's trying to be efficient with their budget and sort of cover themselves and be ready for any eventuality. And I think there was some stat from WPP, and I won't quote the number, but such a massive amount of content that's being made is actually just never seen. Right. And I'm sure that's the case to some extent in film and TV too. But I think to embrace what we're kind of asking people to do is a massive shift. And I've listened to a few episodes of your, and hearing about sort of older crew being resistant to change. We have the same things, getting the right suppliers in place, making it cost effective, getting people to consider it up front. All of those things ring true for us too. And I think trying to get everyone on board, it's a massive educational shift as well. And in the last 10 years, we've had COVID, we've had in the UK Brexit, which has impacted a lot on the type of work that people are working on in the UK, the volume. So many different factors that have sort of sometimes overtaken, sometimes just sort of like, people just had to put things down and go, right, we've got to solve this fire first. This is just the one we've got to focus on right now. So I think considering everything, I think we're doing all right. If I'd be lying if I said, oh, it would be amazing if we could do X, Y, and Z. If I'd love it to be further forward, but I think I have to think about where we were 10 years ago, and the sort of, you always think, well, we'll just need to climb over that mountain, then you sort of see 10 more bigger ones. But if I think about what I wanted to achieve then and where we are now, that's pretty massive. So I think, yeah, I think we've done pretty well. And in the US too, there's some great organizations. We've worked with Green the Bid for a long time, which is sort of doing similar things. And we've found now that, some of the larger holding companies are sort of extending out their use of what we can, our tools and resources and things out to their US offices. So there's definitely a focus on sort of pushing things beyond the UK for those that are sort of really super engaged, which is great for us. And we're also getting people from lots of other countries come to us. So yeah, it definitely feels like there's the most momentum that there's ever been, but it only takes one, pandemic, and hopefully there's not another one, to kind of just put a pause on things and give people something else to kind of have to consider and, factor
Just
in.
throw a bunch of plastic back in the mix.
Yeah, exactly. But like, oh my God, we just got to solve this right now. Let's just go back to what we were doing before and come back to this later. Yeah. So yeah, fingers crossed there's no more, for many, many reasons, but yeah.
Yeah, well, as you have seen this now over time, and one of the things that, I think is helpful in reading like the Ad Green annual report and whatnot, it seems like there are more people engaged. There's more transparency around this. Are you seeing that as well? I mean, definitely you're a collector of all, of information, via the calculator and
Mhm.
whatnot. But are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Are folks talking about it more? Is there more awareness?
I think definitely. I mean, the change from so we put out 2 annual reports, so 4 annual reviews. The change, even just from putting out the first one to the second one, was quite remarkable in that people were happy to talk about what they had done in the second one, because I think they saw from the first one sort of the positive impact of it, and also they didn't kind of want to not be in there. So I think there was reluctance in the beginning to sort of, everyone's sort of like, well, who else is doing it? Are we the only ones? We don't want to be accused of greenwashing, or, people were a bit scared of what to say and how to sort of talk about success in whatever form that took. And I think really for us, we've been talking about people using our carbon calculator, and it was really about, have you created a project and completed it? Like, that's what success looks like right now. It's not, we measured our footprints for a year, compared them to last year, and then we found this massive reduction. Like, we're not there yet. It's just that's not where we are. So I think for us, it's all about kind of making sure people feel supported and sort of able to celebrate how far they've come, even if it's not where they think they're supposed to be, or where we think they're supposed to be. So I think it's, having that report from year 1 to year 2 was great. And I think, we've seen a lot less reluctance to sort of talk about things. I mean, getting, panelists for events was always quite tricky because people don't want to come and talk about it, or they have to work through sort of 10 layers of approvals before they can come and sit down with us. And, they've got sort of 3 talking points they can discuss and nothing else because they're so worried, so it's definitely changed a bit since that, which is great for us to kind of be able to put more people's stories out there. And it encourages other people when I think, when they're like, oh, right, they're only that far ahead. Okay, we can get to that point. This is doable. So, it totally encourages others to sort of just get on board and get started. So, yeah.
You have, I mean, the UK, we had the pleasure of speaking with the Green Voltage folks, David Sinfield, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the UK and really pushing the boundaries. Have you found that that's helped build out the ecosystem around UK and Europe? Or are you still, again, like trying to, like, coming up against sort of similar challenges, lack of equipment or mindset as well?
I'd say it's difficult for me to fully answer that now because I'm not in production anymore.
Okay.
So I now essentially run Ad Cream as my full-time job. So although I can get a sense of what's happening on the ground, I'm not on the ground anymore. Which does mean, in terms of sort of, sort of more day-to-day challenges, I'm less aware of those, without sort of going to talk to people and having sort of a bit of a forum for it. I would say that I went to an event a few weeks ago, and and it was a project that Film London put together with some consultants that have been working on it. Creative Zero, a big part of it. And it was looking at the fuel options across London for production. And they helped us with our methodology as well. So helped us sort of look at what fuels to include with our new calculator, sort of the state of generators across the city. And I was sat in that room thinking, this event would not have happened a few years ago. There wouldn't be 200 people in this room excited to hear stats about, how many litres of diesel we use and how we can decarbonize. So I think in terms of sort of the bigger picture, there's so much more engagement. I would say the majority of people in that room were sort of from a film and TV background. And I think that's where there's maybe a bit of, going back to sort of the differences between the industries, like the speed of which we're doing things means you just do it the same way you always have, because you don't have time to really think about it. And, most of our production teams are freelance at the production company level, if that's the structure you're working with. And I think, you come in, you want to get the job done, you want to finish up, because, you get paid for 10 days and then you don't really have time to sort of, you're not going off to sort of, check out all the alternative options. And also, I think you're quite reliant on your heads of department. So if your generator op or your gaffer says, no, we can't do that, you don't question them, because you don't really know what, you don't trust your knowledge to sort of question it. And I think the thing that came up for me in the, the sort of fuel report event was, there's still a massive knowledge gap when it comes to sort of power, and how to sort of change that, and also kind of a confidence gap, I think, in how to approach it and make those changes. So I think, if we have a role perhaps in the future, it's to get back to sort of a bit more grassroots action and sort of empowering people, now that we've just upgraded our tool, so maybe there's a kind of, I'd love to be able to kind of just slightly broaden our focus to kind of get back to some of that, because I think there's some really big education pieces that we could sort of help shine a light on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm seeing that, just similar to that point, even in film and TV, where we spend a lot of time, the education is so critical, I think, in building confidence. If nothing else,
Yeah.
confidence, not even necessarily that sort of, I need to know this technical thing, but the confidence to even get to that next step. And it sounds like that's
Yeah.
kind of what you're talking about, especially when you couple that with speed, and kind of getting to that next step.
Definitely. And I think as well, the other thing that kind of struck me was a lot of the big suppliers of the generators that get used, and people don't tend, so in advertising, you don't tend to hire that separately. You go through your lighting company, and they would generally power the whole set, is how it usually works. And you also don't procure the fuel separately. So they will essentially do all of it and then sort of charge you as a sort of full piece. So as a result, you're kind of slightly more removed from, obviously we've gone down a kind of fuel cul-de-sac here.
I know.
As is the way. But you're sort of more removed from that process and the costings, I think. You don't have that sense of like, oh, a litre, they're charging me X for a litre. I know what that costs at the petrol pump, up the road when I go and fill up my car. So you're sort of not quite so engaged, and then sort of not sure if you should say it, And it was interesting actually how the really big suppliers are already supplying their trucks with HVO. But I think the majority of people who are putting anything into our calculator are assuming they're diesel.
What's HVO for the listeners?
You can ask what it stands
It's like
for now.
renewable diesel.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like I think it's hydrogenated vegetable oil.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that's readily available in the UK?
It's not available on the forecourt, I don't believe, but it's available if you buy in bulk, if you're kind of a logistics or transport company. It's slightly, as far as I understand, it's slightly more expensive, but these companies are kind of committed to doing that based on the sort of ethoses of their companies. So we've got these companies actually doing great things, but they're not necessarily communicating that, or maybe they are, but it's not kind of getting through to those who are on the ground. So it's interesting how people probably don't even realize they're doing slightly better than they are, or their production is doing slightly better than it is, based on just not knowing to ask that question, and the supplier not realizing they should let them know. So it's also kind of just a little breakdown all the way around of kind of what's happening and who's sort of really, being champions, but not necessarily, they're sort of unsung heroes because no one really realizes. So yeah, that was quite an eye-opening point as well, I think.
Yeah. And sort of on that sort of fuel consumption piece, just to kind of round out that cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of the carbon emissions from advertising come from travel in general, flights and that sort of thing. Are you seeing, knowing that and putting that information out, are you seeing folks talk about like how to rethink their travel bit? Because that's, sometimes it's execs traveling in or that sort of thing that's really contributing to that piece.
Yeah, we've definitely heard about or heard from brands that they've kind of adapted their travel policies. So, we have a policy now that we will only send X people, or we will send no one, which I think is slightly scary for the agency in terms of approvals. But they'll sort of mandate to the agency that you can only send X amount of people, or we have to shoot within this distance. So there's definitely movement on those sorts of things. Okay, as long as the budget works, like shoot wherever you want, that's not really an issue. I think there was kind of a more, general sense of like, cool, let's just get this thing shot and we'll go to the best place for the job, for no other consideration than what it looks like on screen and the budget, But now I think there's kind of there is some thought being given to sort of the third aspect, which is, you know, the carbon cost of going to, I don't know, Cape Town in winter. I mean, you know, so many of our shoots go to, I mean, a lot used to go to Ukraine, obviously not so much right now, but also Cape Town in the winter when it's, you know, it's cold here, it's sunny there, and there's no time difference. So it's, you know, it's a great place to go. But, you know, I think there is definitely a lot more thought being given now. Unfortunately, in the UK, we've got, you know, it costs less to go abroad quite often as well. So we've got that kind of against us, and it generally usually always trumps the sustainability card. So it's, I think, for the best will in the world, sometimes it's, well, quite often, I won't lie, it's just, you know, well, it's cheaper, so we kind of need to go and do that. I will say there's definitely a lot of thinking about virtual production, how that can kind of play a role in terms of, you know, not going somewhere or just getting plates, you know, from a local production company and then sort of subbing them in. One thing I think that's a bit unknown for us, and I think almost everyone, is sort of the impact of AI generated content and sort of backgrounds, imagery. And it's, we're still looking at how we could measure it and how we could implement it into our tool in a way that users could easily put it in, you know, sort of with as fewer nitty-gritty details as possible. Because that's obviously a big part of, you know, potentially if you're using virtual and you're using that kind of content to create, sort of fill the gaps, then that's obviously something that needs to be factored in when you're looking at that approach versus another one. But at the moment, it's not something that's easy to measure. So, you know, there's sort of not a full picture. So I'm always, you know, it's just slightly I'm interested when people sort of say, oh, our approach is much more sustainable, because you sort of have to think, well, where are the boundaries being drawn? And, you know, I sort of always want to go, where's the sort of footnote stats? Can I just have a little look, please? Because I'm always, if it is genuinely less, I'm all for it. You know, and in some cases, I'm absolutely sure that it is. But I don't think there's a definitive, this is better than this yet, because I don't think we can factor in all of the pieces that are at play. So, but, you know, there's definitely more talk about not flying if possible. And, you know, a lot less helicopters, a lot more drones. So that's good.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, shift in the right direction, I'd say. And definitely an awareness of business versus economy, and sort of sending less people, traveling less far, you know, going in economy instead of business. Those sorts of considerations, even if they're not sort of not going at all. So yeah, I think it's definitely some positive movement.
Yeah. And Joe, you may have heard us talk about, we talk a lot about the content, the language, the stories that people are saying. Are you seeing that as well in advertising? The, you know, maybe subtle, maybe not so subtle, you know, and also just, yeah, around the sort of tactics that we're using to say and sort of showcase sustainability, but also are there tactics on the opposite side of things, right? To try to sort of hold back some of the sustainability messaging.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. You know, I remember when I was first sort of doing this, and, you know, you see an ad that mentioned anything about sustainability, and you're like, oh my God, they've said it out loud. Like, you know, it's amazing. And now it's sort of really every other ad is sort of talking about the credentials of the product or service or whatever it is in a really positive way. Now, that does also open the door to some greenwashing. And, you know, there's been some various rulings in the UK on various ads about sort of, you know, trying to claim this, but actually doing this behind the scenes. So I'm glad there's kind of an active, you know, it's called the Advertising Standards Authority. So they're kind of constantly looking out for people who are breaching the guidelines, making sure people are trying to do it, you know, the right way. But yeah, I think the messaging is definitely, it's become really commonplace. It's not, you know, and people will, you know, as a result of something they've seen, they'll talk about it. We recently had a sort of competition I was part of the judging panel for, but we were looking at, you know, small brands or brands that were sort of trying to win some media airtime, who were sort of trying to create ads, and they, you know, we gave them some media spend as part of the prize. But the one that won was talking about insect dog food that they, you know, that was their product. And just the narrative in the ad, it was funny, it was engaging, and it was about a great product, you know. And it's sort of like, if you can hit all three, you know, it was brilliant. And so I think there's definitely a shift in, you know, what people are talking about, what they're happy to sort of say on screen, and how people are absorbing that and taking it in. and feeling sort of confident that they understand the messages, and they know that that's a good product, that's maybe not so good, for example, based on what they've seen. So yeah, I think it's been a really nice positive change to see that come up so often.
And how long do you think it will take to kind of see the result of this, this content, if you will, these tactics? How long do you think it'll take to see that in the marketplace, where it's influenced people, maybe influence what they purchase, these sorts of things?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, everyone operates from their own kind of echo chamber. And I think, I mean, it's also difficult when you work in a sustainability company and everyone's very well versed. So people, you tend to sort of talk about the same things, and not that you assume everyone's like you, but there's an element of that. But I think there's definitely a feeling of, if we are perceived as a company who cares about this, then the public will respond to that. I know that there's lots of stats about this, and I'm not going to claim to try and quote any, but generally I think there's a perception that the public believe it's a good thing to be operating more sustainably, and people do, where possible, use their purchasing power to kind of reflect that belief. So I think it's definitely filtering through. I mean, there are definitely still some terrible products on the market, as as I'm sure is the same in Canada and the US, but I think there's definitely a shift in a lot of ways, and sort of, just people washing their clothes at 30 degrees, instead of 40 as was traditional, and all those sorts of things. That sort of messaging is getting through, especially I think when it's tied to saving money. So, you wash at 30, you save money, you turn your heating down 1 degree, you save some money on your energy bill. So, whenever that connection's made, it also kind of resonates, and, people are sort of taking that on board. So I think, yeah, it's definitely filtering through.
It is the consumers that are going to be voting with their dollars, and pounds and euros.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think we're seeing that, and you can see that when you go to the supermarket, right? You can see that now, right? You have so many more options
Exactly.
out there.
Yeah.
And so are you having those kind of conversations with the advertisers and with groups? Like, I mean, it's just, the way I look at advertising, it just has so much potential to ram key messaging down in a good way.
Yeah, it really can. I mean, I think from an ad green point of view, we're very focused on the behind the scenes. So we have less of those conversations, but I think anecdotally we can see that that's all happening. There's a wider organization that is sort of run out of our parent company. So we're owned by the Advertising Association in the UK now, and they also look after Ad Net Zero, which is another organization. So that has kind of 5 action points, one of which is production, which is sort of where we fit in, and one is the sort of on-screen messaging. So they're really sort of pushing to, they work with the ASA, for example, on what the code looks like and how to sort of make sure you implement that correctly. But also looking for case studies, amazing stories. They have some awards. Advertising people love awards. Always a great way to get people to make good work. So, I think there's a lot of conversation, across the industry about how to use advertising for good. I think there's a long held perception that advertising is bad, and I'm sure there are lots of examples as to when that's the case, but I think there's also lots of great examples about how it can be really amazing. So I think it's using it for the right things. I think with the sort of age of Netflix and being able to fast forward ads and all kinds of things, streaming services, that's sort of had a bit of a dent on the impact we can make in some ways, but also, ads are coming back on Amazon and Netflix. So, it's a sort of just a constant evolution of how we can get the messages across in the best way to the most people, where those messages are good ones. So I think there is a lot of force for good we can have, but it's ever changing and evolving, and how we kind of approach it needs to constantly adapt. So it's just being,
and the ability to go viral, right? I mean, I think that's the main differentiator, right? I mean, someone can see it could be millions of views within a day.
Yeah, which just wouldn't have happened before, but then I guess you've got the offset of less people watching TV, which was always where the money was spent and where the big audiences were, which is not so much the case now. So you've got to kind of really diversify and, make all these pieces of content for all those different channels. And that's when, it's all, it gets sort of more complex and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that there's like such a powerful opportunity on the content side and also, the production side as well. It's two sides of the coin, right? And I really appreciate all the work that you're doing behind the scenes in that regard, because it's definitely neat to see the trend as all of this evolves. One of the things we like to ask, kind of our wrap up question for all our guests. I'm really curious about what you have to say. But if you were to create a new playbook and guiding principles about sustainability and entertainment, what would be first or second on your list?
I think, for us, what we talk about, like, we offer three things. So it's always training, tools, and resources, kind of in that order. Because without understanding the why, there's kind of no point giving someone something to do, because it's kind of never going to be top of their agenda.
Yeah.
So I think for us, like, we're always bound by how much funding we have, as anyone is, as any company is. And there's only so much that we can do despite having lots of dreams and wishes. And I think for us, when we identify those gaps where there are knowledge gaps, or the knowledge gaps, then that's always where I think we can have some impact and some, be a kind of force for good. But trying to get to all those people is very hard, and developing the content and keeping it current as well is very difficult. So I think for us, it would definitely be sort of an educational starting point. The sort of the tool to measure comes next, because without knowing where you are, you kind of can't know what to do about it, and that's why we find a lot of people focusing on very small impact things that they don't realize are so small. I would never say to someone, don't recycle. But if you've flown to Cape Town and then you're looking at your recycling bin as your key thing, it's just a bit misguided. So, and not for any, they just don't know. So, that really has to come next. And then it's kind of, okay, I know this now. What do I do about it? So I'd say that's always our mantra, kind of understand the why, know where you're at, and then work through something about it and create kind of a long-term goal. It's great if someone can reduce on one shoot. What we'd rather do is, or one project, what we'd rather kind of have them do is see that there's a trend and create a policy or a kind of plan to reduce those really big pieces. Like, it's a travel policy. It's making sure we're always at the studios that are on renewable energy, or whatever it might be, to kind of make that across the board change, rather than like, oh, this one time we had this one great production manager who really cared and they did all these things, and then that was great. On to the next shoot, you know what I mean? So it's kind of trying to create this longer term shift rather than a piece by piece isolated sort of, siloed change. Not sure if that quite answered the question, but that's kind of, that was kind of our approach. And I think how we would, if we could do more, we would, but that it would always be kind of in that sort of a vein, I think.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Like, I love it. I love hearing your perspective on this. Thank you. Really.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's so nice to see you for so long.
I know. It's been fun. I think we met in person, at the Sustainable Production Forum, like back in.
Yeah, I just listened to the episode that you guys put out, and you were talking about it, and I was like, oh, so many fun memories of being at SPF.
I know. God, that was like what, 2018? 2017?
It was, I remembered. Yeah, I was thinking,
like
I think 2018.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, we've been talking about this for a long time, haven't we?
I know.
Yeah. And then I was in the UK 2019, I think.
Yeah.
For
think
some
you dialed into an event of ours one time as well.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, back in the midst of time.
Exactly.
I know. Cool. Well, thank you. That concludes our recording, our session. So again, just really appreciate what you're doing, Joe, and pushing forward.
You guys too. When I saw you guys were making a podcast together, I was like, oh, brilliant. Two great people together.
So great talking to Joe.
Yeah, she's so great and just so kind, and just every day every year just keeps pushing it. And I think that's great to see her at this. I was surprised to hear that she's really no longer on the production side, and is just purely at the ad green side, making it happen, which I guess is what happens. Eventually you can't do it all, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think she is the global director. She manages all of that, and it's, permeating the advertising industry. So it's really exciting to see what she has built and her team has built and how they're getting the word out there. I mean, we hear about them all the time in the work that we're doing. Are you using the ad green calculator? We want to do this. We want to do that. So it's, definitely, and she mentioned this, they want to be a force for good. I think they're doing it. They're definitely making strides there and influencing the advertising industry.
Yeah, which is again a different subset of the production and entertainment world. So they need different messaging. They have different. She said there's some crossover on the cruise, so that's actually bonus. And I like what she said about training tools and resources, and that's an ongoing theme here that we keep hearing.
So check them out. Ad Green.
Ad Green.
Hello, entertainment industry. Something I've been working on over the past year with partners U.S. Green Building Council California and Aerith Environmental is the development of the Sustainable Production for Entertainment Certification, or SPEC, as we like to call it.
It's the first certification for the entertainment workforce, and it's now live for folks to sign up.
Yeah, go to the U.S. Green Building Council California website at usgbc-ca.org to learn more about it and to register for an upcoming class. This is a great way to up your sustainability game and gain a professional certification. So this is for you. See you in class.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.